The fluorescent lights of the 40th floor hum with a clinical, soul-sucking buzz. Tanya Drexler, 40s, doesn't mind the silence. Silence is safe. She pushes her mop bucket across the Italian marble, her movements rhythmic and practiced. She is a ghost in a polyester uniform. Inside the boardroom, the shadows are long. She slips inside to empty a bin, but stops. Two men stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows, not the usual suited guards, but men in tactical gear, speaking a language that isn't Korean. One holds a burner phone. Midnight. Basement level. Park Tae-jun said no witnesses. We kill the younger brother, the money hits the escrow. Tanya's heart hammers against her ribs like a trapped bird. She ducks behind a heavy oak desk, her breath hitching. She's seen enough family business in this building to know that witnesses to a coup don't get pensions, they get buried. Minutes later, Park Jae-Won exits his office. He looks tired, carrying the weight of a reformed empire on his shoulders. He catches Tanya's eye and offers a small, genuine nod. Good night, Tanya. Get home safe. It's that small spark of humanity that snaps her fear into resolve. As he passes, she doesn't speak. She simply presses a crumpled yellow maintenance slip into his palm. The yellow maintenance slip felt unnervingly hot against Jae-Won's palm, as if the ink were still burning into the paper. He stood in the center of his glass-walled office, the sprawling lights of Manhattan mocking him with their cold, distant brilliance. Your brother paid them to kill you tonight. He didn't crumple the note. He didn't scream. Instead, he felt a hollow, crystalline silence settle over his chest. He thought of Tae-jun's face at dinner last week, the way his older brother had smiled while pouring his tea, the grip on his shoulder that had felt like affection but was, in retrospect, a measurement for a shroud. Jae-Won looked toward the heavy oak door. Beyond it sat his staff, his guards, and his legacy. For 3 years, he had bled himself dry trying to wash the soot off the Park name. He had traded back-alley extortions for boardrooms and blood money for legitimate bonds. He thought he was building a bridge to the future. He hadn't realized he was just building a taller platform for his brother to hang him from. The grief hit him first, a sharp, jagged physical pain. They had shared a mother, a father, and a childhood forged in the fires of the Syndicate's rise. But the grief was quickly cauterized by the cold reality of survival. If Tanya, a woman who existed on the periphery of his world, knew about the hit, then the secret was already a corpse. He walked to his desk and pressed the intercom. Kim, come in here. Seconds later, his head of security entered. Kim was a man of iron and silence, a veteran who had served their father. Jae-Won watched the man's eyes, looking for a flicker of guilt, a shadow of the foreign crew Tanya had overheard. Sir? The car is ready for the gala, Kim said, checking his watch. Change of plans, Jae-Won said, his voice a low, dangerous velvet. He tucked the maintenance slip into his breast pocket, right over his heart. I need you to sweep the service corridor on level 4. And Kim? Do it personally. Don't radio it in. As Kim bowed and exited, Jae-Won felt the walls of the penthouse begin to shrink. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a target. He glanced at the security monitors on his desk, watching the grainy black and white feed of the hallways. Somewhere in the guts of this building, the men his brother hired were moving. He reached into his desk, pulling out a heavy, cold steel Beretta he hadn't touched in years. He checked the magazine with the practiced efficiency of the man he used to be. The diplomat was gone. The brother was broken. Only the boss remained. The weight of the Beretta in Jae-Won's hand felt like an admission of failure. Every ounce of its steel mocked the diplomas on his wall and the peace treaties filed in his cabinets. He didn't want this version of himself to exist anymore, but Tae-jun had reached into the grave of their family's past and dragged the monster back out. He sat behind his desk, not as a CEO, but as a general. He watched the security monitors. On screen 4, a cleaning crew he didn't recognize entered the freight elevator. They carried heavy toolboxes, but their gait was too disciplined, their eyes too roving. They weren't looking for leaks, they were checking sight lines. The betrayal tasted like copper in his mouth. He picked up his private cell phone and scrolled to his brother's name. His thumb hovered over the call button. He wanted to ask why. He wanted to ask if the decades of shared blood and the final wishes of their father meant so little compared to the thrill of a turf war. But he knew the answer. To Tae-jun, loyalty wasn't a bond, it was a currency, and he had just spent his last cent. A soft chime echoed in the room. The private elevator, the one requiring a biometric scan, was ascending from the executive garage. Only 2 people had access. Jae-Won stood, sliding the beretta into the small of his back, concealing it beneath his charcoal blazer. He composed his face into the mask of the younger brother, the scholar, the diplomat, the soft one. The doors slid open. Park Tae-jun stepped out, smelling of expensive tobacco and cold rain. He smiled, a wide, performative grin that didn't reach his eyes. Jae-Won, Tae-jun rumbled, walking toward the bar in the corner of the office as if he owned the air in the room. You're late for the union dinner. I thought I'd come pick you up myself. Ensure my little brother didn't get buried in paperwork. Jae-Won watched him pour 2 fingers of whiskey. He felt the yellow maintenance slip in his pocket, the paper crinkling against his chest. Your brother paid them to kill you tonight. I'm not going to the dinner, Tae-jun, Jae-Won said quietly. Tae-jun paused, the decanter midair. He turned, his expression flickering between irritation and a predatory curiosity. And why is that? The dock workers don't respond well to being stood up. Because I was told the menu tonight was quite lethal, Jae-Won replied. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Tae-jun's smile didn't drop, it simply curdled. He set the glass down with a deliberate, heavy clack. The charade was thinning, the brotherly mask slipping to reveal the enforcer beneath. You always were too smart for your own good, Jae-Won, Tae-jun whispered, his hand drifting toward his own waistband. Father should have remembered that smart men are easier to break than strong ones. The tension in the room was a living thing, a coiled viper waiting for the first heartbeat of hesitation. Tae-jun's hand remained frozen near his hip, his eyes scanning Jae-Won with a new, lethal intensity. He was looking for the tremor in Jae-Won's hands, the sweat on his brow, the signs of the soft academic he had spent years patronizing. He found none. The men in the freight elevator, Jae-Won said, his voice as steady as a surgeon's. They aren't Syndicate. They don't have the ink, and they don't have the discipline of our people. Who are they, Tae-jun? Eastern Bloc? Mercenaries from the coast? Tae-jun let out a short, jagged laugh, stepping away from the bar. They're professionals, Jae-Won. Something you never understood. You thought you could run a kingdom with handshakes and tax returns. But power isn't a ledger. It's a blade. I'm just returning the steel to the family crest. By killing your own blood? By cutting out the cancer of weakness, Tae-jun spat. You're an architect trying to build a cathedral on a swamp. I'm the only one willing to do the dirty work to keep us standing. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. The hum of the HVAC system cut out, plunging the 40th floor into a suffocating, velvet darkness. Only the weak, red glow of the emergency exit signs and the distant, pulsing lights of the city filtered through the glass. The hit had begun. The ghost crew had cut the primary breakers. In the dark, the sound of a leather holster snapping open was like a gunshot. Jae-Won didn't wait. He dived behind the heavy mahogany desk just as a silenced round shattered the crystal decanter on the bar where he had stood seconds before. You always were a fast learner, Tae-jun's voice drifted through the shadows, moving toward the private elevator. But you don't know this building like I do, little brother. My men are coming up the stairs. The elevators are dead. You're trapped in a glass cage. Jae-Won pressed his back against the desk, his heart thundering. He reached into his pocket and felt the crinkle of Tanya's note. He realized then that Tae-jun was wrong. Tae-jun knew the Syndicate's strength, and he knew the building's security, but he didn't know the building's soul. He didn't know the people who scrubbed the blood off the floors at 3 a.m. Jae-Won pulled his beretta and clicked the safety off. He didn't head for the main doors or the elevator. Instead, he stayed low, crawling toward the small, unremarkable supply closet near the kitchenette. Tanya had mentioned the service tunnels once, the invisible paths the cleaners used to move trash without disturbing the executives. The hunters were in the hallway. He could hear the metallic click of their weapons. But as Jae-Won slipped into the shadows of the utility corridor, he wasn't thinking like a boss. He was thinking like a ghost. The utility corridor was a narrow, concrete throat that smelled of industrial bleach and old dust. It was a world of exposed pipes and humming wires, the ugly, functional truth hidden behind the building's expensive facade. Jae-Won moved in a crouch, the Beretta held low. Above him, the muffled thump of boots on carpet echoed through the ceiling tiles. The mercenaries were in his office. He reached a junction where the pipes branched like iron veins. There, huddled in the alcove of a massive industrial fuse box, was a shadow that didn't belong. Jae-Won leveled his weapon. "Don't move." A gasp broke the silence. A flashlight flickered on, pointing at the floor, and in the reflected glow, he saw the terrified eyes of Tanya Drexler. She was trembling, her yellow janitor's vest glowing like a beacon in the gloom. "Mr. Park," she whispered, her voice cracking. I saw them coming up the stairs. I didn't know where else to go." Jae-Won lowered the gun, his pulse slowing just enough for the guilt to settle in. She was here because of him. Because she had chosen to be a shield instead of a witness. "Tanya, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have involved you." "You didn't involve me," she said, straightening her shoulders with a sudden, sharp dignity. "I saw what was happening. I've lived in this city a long time, Mr. Park. I know when the wolves are out." From the corridor behind them, a heavy metal door groaned open. A beam of light cut through the dark, sweeping the concrete walls. "Sector 4 clear." Moving to the service hub, a voice crackled over a radio, cold, professional, and foreign. Jae-Won looked at Tanya. He knew the blueprints of this skyscraper by heart, but those blueprints only showed the offices of power. They didn't show the shortcuts used by the people who kept the building breathing. "They're cutting off the exits," Jae-Won whispered, leaning closer. "My brother knows every security station. He's watching the cameras from a mobile unit. If I move toward the lobby, I'm dead." Tanya looked at the labyrinth of pipes, then back at him. She reached into the heavy ring of keys at her hip, her fingers finding a small, unbranded master. "The cameras don't see the trash chutes or the laundry lifts," she said, her fear transforming into a quiet, focused resolve. "And they definitely don't see the sub-basement drainage tunnels. They think they've trapped a tiger in a cage, Mr. Park. They don't realize there's a basement full of mice who know all the holes." Jae-Won looked at the woman he had passed 1,000 times in the hall. He had always seen her humanity, but he had never realized her power. "Lead the way," he said. As they slipped deeper into the bowels of the machine, Jae-Won realized that Tae-Jun had made the fatal mistake of every tyrant. He had ignored the people who made his world run. And tonight, that invisibility was going to be the only thing that saved them. The air grew heavy and damp as they descended. This was the building's underworld, a place of thrumming boilers and the rhythmic, metallic heartbeat of the city's infrastructure. Tanya moved with a surprising, silent grace, her sneakers squeaking only slightly on the wet concrete. She didn't use a flashlight, she felt the walls with the familiarity of someone who had walked these paths for a lifetime. "Watch your step here," she breathed, guiding Jae-Won around a jagged steam pipe. The floor dropped 6 inches. Jae-Won followed, his hand resting on the rough brickwork. Above them, he heard a muffled explosion, likely a breaching charge. His office was being torn apart. Tae-Jun would be standing there now, staring at the empty desk, his frustration mounting. Jae-Won felt a strange, detached coldness. The grief had been burned away by the sheer necessity of the moment. They reached a heavy steel hatch labeled Maintenance Level B2. Tanya fumbled with her keys, the metallic jingle sounding like a klaxon in the silence. "Tanya," Jae-Won whispered, his hand covering hers to steady the shaking. "Why did you do it? You could have walked away." You could have stayed invisible. Tanya looked at him, her face partially obscured by the shadows of a low-hanging duct. My mother told me that if you stand by and watch a fire, your hands get just as burnt as the person who lit the match. You're a good man, Mr. Park. In this building, that's a rare thing. I wasn't going to let them kill the only person who says, please, before he asks for the trash to be emptied. The lock clicked. She pulled the door open, revealing a narrow catwalk suspended over the building's massive water filtration system. This leads to the loading docks, she explained, pointing toward a faint, flickering light in the distance. But we have to be careful. The docks have cameras that even my keys can't turn off. Jae-Won checked his Beretta. If they're monitoring the docks, my brother will have his best shooters there. He knows I'll try to get to the street. Then we don't go to the street, Tanya said, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. We go to the freight bay. There's a delivery truck from the linen service parked in Bay 3. It's automated. It leaves at 1 a.m. sharp, regardless of who's watching. Jae-Won checked his watch, 12:48 a.m. The sound of footsteps rang out on the catwalk behind them, rapid, heavy, and synchronized. The ghost crew had found the service entrance. Go, Jae-Won commanded, shoving Tanya toward the ladder. Get to the bay. Hide in the truck. What about you? Jae-Won turned back toward the darkness of the tunnel, his silhouette sharp against the industrial machinery. I'm going to give my brother the conversation he's been asking for. I'll meet you at the truck, Tanya. I promise. The first mercenary rounded the corner of the filtration tank with the precision of a ghost. He was draped in shadows, his suppressed rifle leading the way. He didn't see Jae-Won, not until it was too late. Jae-Won stepped from behind the heavy iron pillar, his movements no longer hesitant. The diplomat had been shed like a skin. He fired twice. The muffled thwip-thwip of the Beretta echoed off the wet concrete as the man collapsed into the shallow drainage pool. Before the body could even splash, a second shooter appeared on the catwalk above. Jae-Won dived behind a massive industrial pump just as a hail of lead tore into the metal casing, sending sparks showering into the dark. He could hear the heavy thud of boots, 3, maybe 4 more coming from the service tunnel. He was pinned, but he wasn't panicked. He was calculating. Jae-Won. Taejun's voice crackled over the building's emergency intercom system, distorted and booming. Stop playing at being a soldier. You're dragging a civilian into a grave she didn't dig. Give me the janitor, and I'll make your end quick. I'll even give you a funeral the family can be proud of. Jae-Won gripped his weapon, his knuckles white. The mention of Tanya ignited a cold, focused rage that burned hotter than the steam pipes around him. He looked up at the maze of overhead valves. He remembered Tanya's words about the invisible paths. He reached up, grabbing a release lever for the high-pressure steam line. With a guttural shout, he wrenched it downward. A violent hiss filled the chamber as a blinding white cloud of scalding vapor erupted from the pipes. The catwalk above vanished in a fog of heat. The mercenaries cried out, their thermal goggles blinded by the sudden surge of white-hot air. Jae-Won moved through the mist like a vengeful spirit. He knew this basement now, he had the map Tanya had gifted him in his mind. He surfaced near the stairs, catching the second shooter in a disoriented stagger. A single shot ended the threat. He didn't stay to admire the work. He turned and sprinted toward Bay 3. The loading dock was a cavernous space of concrete and yellow caution tape. In the center sat the linen truck, its engine idling with a low, rhythmic growl. The rear doors were cracked open. Jae-Won scrambled inside just as the overhead door began to groan upward. He saw Tanya huddled behind a wall of laundry bins, her eyes wide. He slumped against the metal siding, the adrenaline receding to leave a jagged edge of exhaustion. You're bleeding, she whispered, pointing to a graze on his shoulder. Jae-Won didn't look. He looked at the closing doors of the warehouse as the truck began to roll forward. They were out. But as the city lights began to flicker through the slats of the truck, he knew the night wasn't over. They won't stop, Jae-Won said, his voice sounding older, harder. Tae-jun won't stop until there's nothing left of either of us. So what do we do? Tanya asked. Jae-Won looked at the Beretta, then at the city skyline. We stop running. We go to the one place he thinks I'm too afraid to show my face. The linen truck hissed to a stop 3 blocks away from the Park Syndicate's traditional stronghold, an unassuming social club in Queens that smelled of roasted meat and decades of spilled secrets. The modern office in Manhattan was for the world to see, but this place, with its wood-paneled walls and bulletproof glass, was where the family truly lived. Stay in the truck, Jae-Won commanded, his hand on the door lever. The driver is automated, but the GPS is routed to the central depot. Once you get there, walk away. Don't look back. There's a locker at the Grand Central Station, number 402. The key is in my desk, but the backup is under the trash bin in the lobby bathroom. Take what's inside and leave the city. Tanya reached out, her hand catching his sleeve. The terror had faded, replaced by a weary, maternal sternness. You're going back in there alone. That's not a plan, Mr. Park. That's a suicide note. Jae-Won looked at her, his silhouette framed by the harsh amber glow of a street lamp. Tae-jun thinks I'm a coward because I prefer ink to blood. He's waiting for me at the docks or the airport. He doesn't expect me to walk into the lion's den. He squeezed her hand. You saved my life, Tanya. Don't let it be for nothing. He stepped out into the biting night air, the smell of rain and exhaust filling his lungs. He didn't sneak. He walked directly to the front door of the social club. The 2 guards at the door, old-school loyalists with scarred knuckles and suspicious eyes, straightened in shock. They looked at his torn blazer, the blood on his shoulder, and the cold, dead look in his eyes. They didn't draw their weapons. They simply opened the door. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fermented cabbage and expensive scotch. At the far end of the room, sitting beneath a portrait of their father, was Tae-jun. He was surrounded by the Syndicate elders, the men who had built the empire on bones. Tae-jun looked up, his drink halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face. Jae-Won? How? The professionals you hired are dead in the basement, brother, Jae-Won said, his voice carrying a resonant, terrifying stillness that silenced the room. He didn't draw his gun. He didn't need to. He walked to the center of the floor, standing before the elders. Tae-jun tried to sell our legacy to foreign mercenaries, Jae-Won announced, throwing the yellow maintenance slip onto the table. It landed in a puddle of spilled whiskey. He didn't just try to kill his boss. He tried to kill his brother using outside blood. He brought strangers into our house to clean his mess. The elders looked at the note, then at Tae-jun. In their world, violence was accepted, even encouraged, but involving outsiders in a blood feud was the ultimate heresy. Tae-jun stood, his chair screeching against the floor. He's lying. He's weak. He's turning us into a corporation. I am turning us into a future, Jae-Won countered, stepping into his brother's space. And tonight, I'm showing you exactly what happens to those who try to burn it down. The social club was a tomb. The elders, men whose faces were etched with the scars of 1,000 betrayals, looked from the blood-stained maintenance slip to Tae-jun's trembling hands. In the hierarchy of the Park Syndicate, ambition was a virtue, but bringing outside blood into a family feud was an unforgivable sacrilege. It was a confession of inadequacy. You brought mercenaries into the home our father built? Elder O asked, his voice a dry rasp that carried more weight than a gunshot. I did what was necessary. Tae-jun bellowed, his desperation finally breaking through the facade of the tough enforcer. He reached for his weapon, his fingers clawing at the grip, but he was slow, hampered by the very arrogance that had led him here. Jae-Won didn't pull his own gun. He didn't have to. Before Tae-jun could clear his holster, 2 of the house guards, men who had served Tae-jun for a decade, stepped forward. With a synchronized, brutal efficiency, they pinned Tae-jun's arms to the mahogany table. His forehead slammed against the wood, inches away from the yellow note that had unmade him. You think they follow you because they fear you, Tae-jun, Jae-Won said, walking slowly to the head of the table. But they follow the name. They follow the stability. And you just showed them that you would burn the house down just to say you own the ashes. Jae-Won looked at the elders. My brother is no longer a member of this family. He is a liability. He outsourced our honor to strangers. If I had died tonight, those mercenaries wouldn't have handed you the keys. They would have taken the house for themselves. A heavy silence followed. The logic was cold, ironclad, and irrefutable. Elder O nodded once. It was a death sentence or an exile. In this world, they were often the same thing. What would you have us do, boss? O asked. The title hung in the air, heavy and official. Jae-Won felt the weight of it settle onto his shoulders, the very weight he had tried to transform into something lighter, something cleaner. But to protect the future, he had to command the present. Exile, Jae-Won said, his voice devoid of pity. Strip him of his assets. Put him on a boat to the islands. If he ever touches American soil again, he is fair game for anyone with a blade. Jae-Won. You coward. Taejun screamed as he was dragged toward the back exit. You don't have the stomach to finish it yourself. Jae-Won didn't look back. He turned to the bar and poured a single glass of water. His hands were steady, but his heart felt like it had been hollowed out with a chisel. He had won the empire, but he had lost his brother. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't call his lawyers or his accountants. He sent a single text to an unsaved number. The locker is yours. Get out of the city. Thank you for seeing me. He watched the sent notification flicker. Somewhere in the dark, a woman who moved like a ghost was finally free. Now, he had to figure out how to be a king in a room full of ghosts. The morning sun began to bleed through the smog of the city, casting long, bruised shadows across the pavement. Outside the social club, the world was waking up, unaware that the tectonic plates of New York's underworld had shifted in the dark. Jae-Won stood on the sidewalk, his charcoal blazer ruined, his white shirt stained with the iron scent of the basement and the salt of his own sweat. He watched a black sedan pull away, carrying his brother into a nameless exile. Taejun's face had been pressed against the glass, not the face of a warrior, but of a man who realized too late that he had been outplayed by the very decency he despised. The elders remained inside, already recalculating their loyalties, their ledgers, and their lives under a leader who had proven he could be more ruthless than the monsters. Jae-Won walked 3 blocks north to a small, nondescript diner near the train tracks. He sat in the back booth, the vinyl sticking to his skin. A few minutes later, the bell above the door chimed. Tanya walked in. She had changed out of her yellow vest into a simple denim jacket, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She looked tired, her face etched with the exhaustion of a woman who had carried a secret heavy enough to break the city. She slid into the booth across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. The waitress dropped 2 mugs of black coffee between them, the steam rising in a steady, honest column. He's gone, Jae-Won said quietly. Tanya nodded, her hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. And you? Are you still there, Mr. Park? Or did you leave something back in that basement? Jae-Won looked at his hands. They were clean now, scrubbed in the social club's restroom, but he could still feel the weight of the beretta. I did what I had to do. To protect the people who work for me. To protect people like you. Don't carry that on my account, Tanya said, her voice firm but kind. I didn't give you that note so you could become him. I gave it to you so you could stay you. She reached into her pocket and placed a small, silver key on the table, the key to the locker at Grand Central. I took what I needed for a bus ticket to my sister's place in Virginia, she said. The rest, that's not for me. I'm a janitor, Mr. Park. I know how to spot trash, and I know how to leave it behind. Jae-Won pushed the key back toward her. It's not a payment, Tanya. It's a pension. You can't go back to the building. My brother's shadows have long memories. Take it. Start something of your own. Somewhere where no one is invisible. Tanya looked at the key, then at the man across from her. She saw the cost of the night in the lines around his eyes. She took the key and tucked it away. "Thank you, Jae-Won," she said, using his name for the first and last time. As she stood to leave, the diner filled with the morning rush, construction workers, nurses, commuters. Tanya blended into the crowd, disappearing into the sea of people who make the world turn while the great men fight over the steering wheel. Jae-Won watched her go until she was lost in the light of the street. He took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, pulled out a fresh legal pad from his bag, and began to write. There was a legacy to rebuild, and for the first time in his life, the ink felt more powerful than the blood.